Hello, people. My name is Edward King. Um, this is another one of my audio, non video presentations. As you can see, I have the camera pointed at my Windows Media Player, and if you can hear the music, it's a piece by Bruce Cockburn called Hand Dancing. It's from the album Joy Will Find a Way. And it's been a while since I've made one of my non-video audio presentations, and so I thought that I might embark upon uh, making another one. Tonight was, well, it was an interesting night because I shared a little snippet of some of my thoughts regarding slavery and oppression. And one of my Facebook friends allegedly read it and asked me, why don't you Europeans go back home, type of thing. Well, it's a little hard to go back to some place you never came from. I have never set foot in Europe, but I do have a European background. And based on what I wrote, I think that it was a very valid question for that person to ask me. I stated that we are all responsible to our ancestors, and I meant that collectively. And so I think it was a valid question. But I don't feel that going to the place, if there is a real place for my ancestors, geographically speaking, globally speaking, if they're limited to a particular piece of geography, that would really be a way for me to honor the memory of my ancestors. To further complicate it, on my mother's side, her being probably from about 6 generations Canadian, I have First Nations ancestry, so I asked him where did that put me. Surprisingly, he mentioned something to the effect that not very far, because I could always just leave a leg behind, I guess. But that was my mother's side, or if that was matriarchal or whatever, and so this was not measured or gauged by the mother's side. Now I find that ironic because this man actually has, at least if I'm to believe what he stated, he has Native Indigenous, I would imagine that means First Nations ancestry himself. He considers himself First Nations, I suppose. I'm not sure what they would call it. Indigenous American, because he lives in the United States, not Canada. I'm just trying to grapple with this. I thought it was really ironic because with most indigenous peoples in North America, grandmothers, the matriarchal side, figures actually more prominently than the patriarchal side. In fact, women are not really given much status in most native cultures until they become grandmothers. And then once they're grandmothers, even the chief listens. probably that is due to, so many deaths from infant births and, the harsh climate, environment, whatever, living conditions. I'm sure not very many women even lived to become great-grandmothers and grandmothers and whatnot. But those who survived were given the greatest respect and regard among First Nations people, the matriarchal side of it. So I thought it was ironic that he was suggesting that, because it was my matriarchal side, that it didn't really count for much. Him being of indigenous ancestry himself. But that said, yes, I do have that on my mother's side, Micmac blood. It's a Nova Scotian, Canadian, I guess what we call Nova Scotia today in that area. And I'm not ashamed of that. I'm certainly not ashamed of that. In fact, I feel honored to have that in my makeup, as it were. And I just, I don't really look at myself as European per se, so much as I look at myself as being a Canadian. And I put that first and foremost with respect to my heritage, that I am Canadian. And with my background being what it is from the matriarchal side, my foreground I would like to touch on in as much that my firstborn son and my firstborn daughter are treaty. Now, how is that possible? Well, I think the answer is quite clear. Their mother was also indigenous. So there it is. I think I'm fairly rooted in Canadian heritage here. And where I came from is essentially where all of us come from, our mother's womb. And my mother was born in Canada, and her mother was born in Canada, and I believe her mother and her mother's mother's mother was born in Canada. So I guess, if I'm to honor the native tradition, I am more Canadian than anything else. But I'd also like to speak of my patriarchal side, because I believe his question is still valid, in as much as I do have European ancestry as well. And some might even say Russian ancestry, and some might even say Scot ancestry, and so on and so forth. It goes that way. My father came from a very sort of obscure people from the time it would be called Austria. So we could say then that he had some Germanic blood. His people were a highly persecuted people because they were pacifists. They did not believe in warfare. And like many European peoples, they embraced Christianity and the Holy Bible, and hence were relentlessly persecuted through Romania, and they fled to what is now Russia, and but still of Austrian lineage. They spoke a bastardized German dialect. If I were to describe the sort of people they were, some would say, well, they spoke Low German, but they did not speak Bayerisch. They were just, I guess it'd be Low German. But from what I've studied, there was a people called Österdeutsch, the East German, and surprisingly, I don't know why history seems to sweep this under the rug, but not all German peoples supported Adolf Hitler during the Second War, and many of these were indeed pacifists. They did not believe in war, and therefore they did not support Adolf Hitler in his pursuits. My grandfather was indeed enlisted in the German army. He didn't have a choice. You never had a choice in that. You were either enlisted or you were shot. That was the deal, and you were forced to, participate. But that said, he went AWOL a great deal of time. They were always dragging him back from home. He was a peaceful man. He was a farmer. And he lived in harmony with the Polish people that I guess in that area. In fact, it is still today known as Poland. And although he was, of a Germanic background. But his father fled from Russia to Poland. So here we got a people who was basically forced to be nomadic, coming up out of Austria through Romania into Russia, and then escaping the persecution and oppression of the Russians back into Poland, only to get caught in the war machine during the Second World War, following these generations. If I were to describe the sort of person my grandfather was, knowing him and watching how he lived, he was largely a solitary sort of man, plainclothes, very plainclothes, and sort of reminded me of maybe like the Amish or the Mennonites or Hutterites, who were also of a German derivation. And I just wish some people would understand that not everyone who had a German background was a warmonger or thought themselves superior to anyone, especially a great many of these people who believed what was written in the Bible. And my grandfather was much of the belief that, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, and that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and so forth. But he was neither Hutterite or Mennonite or any of these things. But because of his background, he largely honored a sort of loose Lutheran type of doctrine. Alas, my father sort of broke away from that tradition later on himself, more pointed toward a German Baptist type following, but that's another story. Myself, I'm a Canadian, and I don't really tell anybody to go back to where they came from. I never have the attitude that an immigrant should go back to where he came from, or a Mexican should go back to where they came from. Obviously, they're here because they want a better life, just as my ancestors wanted a better life. And hopefully, they're not here for the purposes of becoming warmongers, and I'm certainly not a warmonger in that regard, but I do have a warfare which is spiritual or psychological or philosophical, however you would like to categorize it. But my warfare, again, is not against flesh and blood. So I hope that helps, in terms of clarification. By rights, I guess some could say that I'm Russian because my grandfather's father was born in Russia, right? But he wasn't really of Russian derivation. So, even though he was born in Russia, right? But then again, my father was born in what is now called Poland. So, and on my birth certificate it says that my father was born in Poland. So I guess that would make me Polish. I don't believe that we can categorize people so easily. My people were largely, I guess, from my father's side, nomadic, forced to be that, maybe of a Germanic lineage, as I mentioned, but or Austrian. So I guess that would make me European from my father's side, with regard to background. But I feel more Canadian than anything else. And given my mother's side, where the Scot comes into play, and the Irish comes into play, and the Welsh comes into play, and of course the Micmac. And I'm not going to downplay that. It took a lot of research even to find it, because unfortunately there was an attitude back in the 1800s, in the late 1800s, that if you had native blood, that you were supposed to keep that hush hush. Well, I'm not going to do that. I know her name, and I know from whence she comes, and I'm honored that on my matriarchal side that there is some good, strong Micmac blood coursing through my veins. And so there it is. I'm quite happy with my very rich heritage and being a Canadian. But I think it is important for me to address that. I think it is important for me to address these things. My grandfather was on my father's side. Well, both my grandfathers were peaceable men. My grandfather on my mother's side would sometimes wander off into the field where the Cree would keep their teepees. He didn't care. They could stay as long as they liked. He respected their nomadic ways, and sometimes would sit in the teepees for weeks on end himself, learning the ways of the people and them. Actually, if you looked at my grandfather on my mother's side, he looked so native that he was readily welcomed by the Cree people, and so he had jet black hair and a big hook beak nose, and he had a reddish brown skin and eyes that just burned like black coals, and but a bit of a wave to his hair, a thick black wave to his hair, and everyone thought that he was native. And well, he did have a little native blood in him, but he was quite a man, and I miss him. I miss him dearly. So there it is. Such a strange mix when I really think of it. I also know or knew my grandfather from my father's side. He could hardly speak any English, even though he could speak 6 different languages. English was his hardest language. And this is what happens when you're in Europe and you have to get along, right? But he mostly spoke Low German, and he was from the Österdeutsch people. And they lost everything when the Russians came in and slaughtered them. They lost it all. My grandfather lost his orchards, his horses, and everything, even though he lived in harmony with the Polish people just fine. This is what war does. You know, it really ruins people and destroys families, and it's just horrendous, to say the least. Horrendous. I'm very grateful to be living in a nation which is largely peaceful, and I'd like to see it stay that way, and I would like to live in harmony with all of the residents of Canada. And I salute my First Nations brothers and sisters, and I hope that my children honor them. My daughter right now is hiking the Pacific Crest Trail on foot all the way. It runs all the way from Mexico into Manning, British Columbia, and she should be returning in the fall time. She's I mean, one look at her and there's no question as to her native ancestry. Likewise, my son, he is second year university, petroleum engineering. It's not hard to see what his ancestry and heritage is just by looking at him. I hope they honor the First Nations people in all that they do as treaty people themselves. They seem to be doing a very good job of it, and thus far. And I think that I invested my seed in a worthy and noble people. So there it is, and I'm sorry if it sounded like I rambled on and on, but if this was a valid question, and there really is no place for me to go being born here in Canada and being a Canadian. This is where I belong. And so I hope you enjoyed my non-video or audio presentation. God bless you. God bless you.